Good day, everyone. I'm Lily Jan. I'm a faculty member at the hotel school here at Cornell, focused on food and beverage management and the moderator of today's conversation. Thank you all for taking the time to be here today, and I'm excited to be here with these two exceptional speakers from the food and beverage industry in the United States to discuss the future of the F&B industry. I'm excited to have an honest conversation about the struggles that have plagued the food and beverage industry and how to address those issues, and perhaps most importantly, how not to go back to normal, but rather recognize the problems of the past and purposefully and intentionally rebuild a better and stronger industry for all. Each of our speakers today bring their incredible knowledge and experience from the industry, and I believe will help identify some of the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead. Joining us today, we have Daniela Senor, the CEO of the Colada Shop and owner of Surinata and Zumo in Washington, D.C. These are food and beverage concepts across the Metro D.C. area, and she just opened a fourth Colada Shop location earlier this year. Yes, during a pandemic. So we're definitely going to ask her some questions about that. And I also have Elizabeth Tilton. She's the founder and CEO of Oyster Sunday, a corporate office for independent restaurants and food brands based in New Orleans and New York City, whose mission is to build a sustainable and supportive infrastructure for the food and beverage industry. Thank you both for being here today. I know that the topics that we're going to talk about are really near and dear to all of your hearts, so I can't wait to learn from each of you. Please let me know if I left something out of your very impressive bios. Just before we went live, we were talking about some of your experiences. I feel woefully undermatched here, so thank God I'm the moderator. But I think, the very first question I'd like to ask you both is, something that's right in the headlines right now. And it's kind of the elephant in the room. We can't avoid it. So I'd really like to talk about labor issues, something that's definitely a big conversation right now. And it seems to have been an ongoing issue. Even before the pandemic, there were labor problems across the country. So what do you think are the major contributing factors to this? And what do you think might be the solutions moving forward? Danielle, I'll go to you first, since you just opened a place and had to staff it.
Sure. Well, that was definitely one of the most challenging things that I've done my entire career, was to staff a new restaurant in the middle of this labor shortages. And I think there's a lot of contributing factors to this. Yes, a lot of people are claiming that unemployment, I think, or unemployment benefits are really affecting it, which I do consider them to be something that's significant within this problem currently. But as you mentioned, it was a problem prior to this. And I think the pandemic allowed people to have some time off. Within that time off, to really reevaluate what was important to them in their lives. Also, in some cases, allow them to explore other options, train themselves within other industries. Because before, I think people gave themselves an excuse, oh, I'm making perhaps as a server too much money in tips, or I'm working, so I'm really busy. It's kind of like entertaining things that were side hustles or hobbies were a lot more difficult. And I think that there was an opportunity there within the pandemic, but also I think people kind of really put their lives at check. People lost loved ones. They were, seeing themselves like moving out of perhaps their apartments, moving back with their parents. And a lot was put in play. And I think, it exposed our industry. It really gave people an insight of like, why am I working late hours, weekends, missing holidays, missing time with my loved ones and crucial times in my life, and is it really worth it? And it's that's I think the ultimate question. Is it really worth it in an industry that's not necessarily known for being well paid, having great benefits, So I think that's all at play right now. And I think to move forward, we really need to not go back to the new normal, but really understand what's important to our employees and how we can change that. But that also, there's another side to that conversation, in my opinion, in which is, the slim margins of the restaurant industry, which ultimately force people to, be overworked, underpaid, and not have the benefits. Sometimes as owners we're put on the spotlight, is like, why are you not necessarily offering more? And it's not, and a lot of the times we're barely making it, or we have very high rents, continuously, more difficult landlords, more higher rents, higher food costs, and higher wages to pay. And that margin starts getting very, very slim until ultimately, how do we make small businesses continue to work while offering great benefits and being overall just sustainable. So I am definitely looking forward to, basically trying to find a middle ground and a solution to where we can continue to have small businesses and create great work environments for our employees so they want to come back.
I mean, I think that makes perfect sense. And it's definitely, a big part of the culture of what's going on and the expectation of the workload and things. But it definitely sounds like, owners and operators are in a tough spot as well, right? They're stuck between wanting to create a great and safe working environment for employees, but also up against vendors and landlords and things like that. Elizabeth, do you have some insight into, what maybe owners and operators might be able to do, or maybe some additional factors that you think might be impacting the labor issue right now?
Yeah, I mean, Danielle, I think very well put on a lot of those factors. And I think the kind of the crux of it, even just going from the employee and then coming back and backing into the employer aspect of it, I think for a year and a half, everyone's had to choose between well-being and compensation. And I think that puts people at odds, and particularly in this industry where there's so many factors to have to deal with childcare and transportation, things that we've talked about and has been in the news, and at this point is by no means a shock. And I think on the employer side and the operator side, I think what's happening is that it's also like I always go back to being like, okay, so if you're looking at your business model and what it was pre-pandemic, and now what it is now, I think a lot of people have to reevaluate that looks like. And that comes down to food costs, comes down to times operations of service, who you're working with, how many vendors you're working with, how many offerings are on your menu. Because I think we have to look at it holistically. It's not just about your fixed costs and your rent or your fixed labor costs. Like, does your labor cost make sense for the business in which you should be running now? And I think that we have to kind of go back to like, what's your cash on hand? What does your P&L look like? Because if we can't back out or start from the crux of being like, is this a sound business? And then back out to what do you want your business to be? Do you want to include health insurance? Do you want to? Then maybe it requires like people on salary and requires less team members. And it might require less operating hours and less days if you can make the budget work. And I just think that a lot of us felt pressure to fill it to the max because margins are so tight. But maybe the reality is a business plan based off of 100% capacity was never viable. And I think that we can't rely on his like institutional knowledge has been passed down from chef to chef or operator to operator, because maybe it's not sound advice and we have to kind of start over. And I think that comes back with labor. Like we have to back out from the financials to get to labor, to get to service, to get to purveyors and food costs. But on top of just the operating budget and kind of technology, how it plays a role and where you open your restaurant is maybe it's not in primary markets anymore. Maybe it's more secondary and tertiary. But on top of that, I think the next kind of bucket besides labor, operational costs, it's food costs. Like we see it as a commodity and like it's fixed. And we kind of self-regulate ourselves across the board where there's 99-cent pizzas in New York. And I don't know if that's how food should be. And again, we can probably go into that. I won't dive too deep, but I do think we have to kind of look at those three factors side by side.
I think there's so many questions I want to ask from the things that you guys have just said. So, I mean, I would definitely want to put a pin in the idea of revisiting the idea or the traditional model of the restaurant industry, which was volume, right? Just moving bodies through. And I think that's something we should definitely talk about. But, we were talking about kind of creating this culture, and we have a question from the audience, which, audience members, please feel free to ask questions throughout. These are two very impressive women with a lot of knowledge, so tapping their brains is a good idea. So one of the questions, and I think this talks a little bit to the culture that Daniela was talking about too, is do you think employees see a career path? So many leaders in the industry came in at entry level and worked their way to the top. Do employees see that potential? And I would add to that, is that still an option these days, right? This idea of starting off as a dishwasher and working your way up, especially with the proliferation of culinary school grads and things like that. What's the option for longevity and career progression and staying power in the industry? Either one of you can take this.
Well, I would say I absolutely hope so, and I think that's why in my company, we've transitioned into just shifting a lot of hourlies into salaries and also giving them a more clear path as to what their role currently is, actually having a very honest conversation as to what do you want to be doing? Where do you see yourself in the next year, where do you see yourself in the next couple of years, to see if we, and we're in growth mode, thankfully, and, seeing, understanding and hearing our employees as to where we can fit them within our growth, and making it clear to them. But that's something definitely that is challenging as you are, growing and trying to figure out basically that path. And also, like, how do we bring and uplift our employees that have been with us already and support their growth and support their dreams ultimately. I would say, Colada Shop being, I'm going to call it more of a fine casual environment, it's a different, like I would say, mentality as far as like fine dining restaurants, which I worked at as well, where you have a more clear progression of like, you start here and then, you work yourself up to captain and then, and then manager, assistant manager and so forth. But, within more casual restaurants, which we've seen a lot of growth spurt and in the last few years, is what does that career path look like, and basically incentivizing people to stay with us. I think it requires a lot of outside knowledge in comparison as well. That's more strategic, more numbers focused as well. So I do believe that there is a path and to support those careers within the industry for sure.
I think to tack onto that, I mean, Pete, I've been asked recently, like, when you're looking at the indications of business health, or you're looking at the indications of like a healthy restaurant or CPG brand, et cetera, the thing I always go back to is, what is your employee retention? Like, because at that point, I mean, if you can, and it's so difficult now, particularly more than ever. And I think there's this kind of duality that's happening. There's a really great, like a big swath that are the kind of career-oriented culinary that really want this as like a vocation. And then there's people who, culinary is a remarkable industry because it's a lot of different walks of life all around the world can enter it, and very different aspects of where they are in their careers or in their profession or in just life. And I think there's this middle ground that was built, and I would say, I think attributed to culinary schools and to television and whatnot, there's this middle ground that I think a lot of people, there's a lot of factors why people have left the industry. But I would say I would be interested to see, as time plays out, where those who left the industry, where of those three scenarios they came from. Because I think that it's going to be interesting to see like who decided to stick in it and like has, for multiple reasons, maybe by opportunity or just life in general. And I'm just intrigued to see how that plays out.
So would you say that a lot of this, based on what Daniela is saying, what you're saying, Elizabeth, is about creating a culture for growth for employees? And if so, what does that culture look like? Is it dependent on the operation? Should a fast casual or a quick serve place have a different expectation and culture for its employees than maybe a fine dining? Or is the culture of success and growth the same no matter what?
I think it depends on the employee, because some restaurants can sit there and say, we're going to do continuing education and cross-training, and you're going to get access to financials. But I think it comes down to like, have you picked the right employee for the team to want to value that? Or is it okay that they don't and they still can operate within your, can still contribute to your team? And I would say, like, in terms of where it's going, I do think that like knowledge is power, in my opinion. And the more that we can cross-train, and like we should be able to be appreciative when an employee leaves to go do something else. And I think as an employer, it's our responsibility to arm them with the information they need and to add tools to their tool belt. So if they leave the culinary industry, they have transferable skills. Because the culinary industry, we have the ability of managing, looking at P&Ls, having service, hospitality. There's so many aspects to it that are remarkable and unbelievable skill sets. And I think, again, not to be like repetitive, but I do think as an employer, it's our responsibility to really arm like people with that and to hopefully have them to stay. But if not, they can go and still be an exceptional employee to us others.
I agree. And I would even say, I personally encourage our team to always have the conversations, even within this very difficult scenario that we're in as far as we're protecting our employees because they're so hard to come by. The conversation, they need to know what's out there and they always have to do what's best for them. Because ultimately if they're not happy, then they're going to bring back a toxic culture. If you're unable to provide the growth that someone needs, then you should be, as you said, Elizabeth, encouraging them to seek out other opportunities that will enhance their growth. Because unfortunately, we try, but we cannot always provide for everyone the best opportunity to sustain that growth in their career. So I think that creates a very healthy environment, and also keeps people happy within the organization, and ultimately, keeps a good culture. And Lily, to go back to, your comments, like creating the same culture throughout different types of establishments, I think the same underlying culture, for sure, I think it's possible. I think the expectations are a little bit different within different types of restaurants. But I also, as you mentioned, Elizabeth, who you're hiring for those positions are also different types of people with different types of experience. So, and they're seeking different things, So I think you have to be able to recognize that, and also understand when people want to, make a switch. Like I recently hired a new director of operations, and he comes from Percolata Shop, and he comes from fine dining, and this is like a completely different world. And I was seeking that. Some people are like, why are you hiring a director of ops with fine dining experience rather than like more, repetitive, casual businesses that you can ultimately, expand with? Because I'm like, I am seeking attention to detail. And I know that's something that's very crucial within fine dining. And I want that attention to detail to be transferred into what we're doing in a more casual setting. So just like, I think understanding what you're seeking, people can basically change their minds as well. So, and kind of moving that culture around, like, what are you, like, what do you want from a type of culture, and like maybe bring it into your organization as well, and leave out the bad as well. Cause so.
Right. And I totally agree with that, Danielle. And I think like part of it too is that I always say like employees, employers, there's an exchange, right? There's an exchange that people are giving and taking from one another. And sometimes it becomes balanced, sometimes it's not. And I do think that like, it's just, there can be like, and we always ask our employees, like, what does success look like for you in the end? Like if we were to part ways, what did you want to gain? Like where do you see your trajectory? Because I think if you understand where their starting point is and where success looks like, I think it's like we hopefully can help cultivate that along the way.
I love this conversation about intentionality, about as you guys, think about the kind of operation you want to run, the kind of people you want to hire, how you're investing your time and your resources into people, and how they can invest back, right? And I think research and academia suggests that if you give people an opportunity to invest back in the company and feel like they're being invested in, they stay and they have loyalty. And it's not, money is ultimately a short-term motivator, right? Because if you work for someone you don't like or don't believe in, it doesn't matter if you get $1 increase in your hourly rate or something like that. Ultimately, that's not going to solve the issues of you not believing in your employer. So I think creating that culture, and as Danielle said, like that underlying belief, regardless of market segment, is really important. That, all of those things. And I really like what you said about attention to detail, right? Finding employees that bring something to the table that you think this is of value to the greater culture. I think that that's something that is maybe overlooked sometimes. So I love this conversation, and I think that this is really important. So thank you for your thoughts on this. I'd like to continue this conversation about operations and things. So we talked a little bit about this just now, and I think that this is something that is also some of the questions in the chat. It's about tech. This is something I just kind of wanted to touch on because I know both of you have some experience and some knowledge, and I've been talking about this a little bit. But, tech has definitely been a big push in the industry since the pandemic, right? It pushed the industry forward several years as it relates to tech, for adaptations, for business and operations. Daniela, can you share with us some of the lessons you learned during this period? I know we talked about your newest Colada Shop just location having QR codes and contactless kiosks and things like that, and those are permanent fixtures. So what was the decision behind that as you opened this place towards the end of the pandemic, or hopefully the end of the pandemic? Mm-hmm. What was the thought there?
So it was actually, we implemented it in our other location that we opened last July, and that one was really in the middle of the pandemic. And I think it was how do we get our products to our customers with them feeling safe? That was like definitely the motivating factor there. Also, the other motivating factor was at the time is like, how do we run a ship with the least amount of employees, because we didn't want them working too close together, so by eliminating at the time potentially a cashier, that ultimately allowed people to have more space within the environment and feel more comfortable. So I think we looked at it from both sides. This is like from our employee safety standpoint, but also from our customer standpoint, like that they didn't want that contact. I think we've learned so much from it. Honestly, and we've embraced the technology. I think initially being a Cuban cafe, it was something that I didn't really necessarily wanted to embrace, because I am really focused on hospitality, and I felt really that interaction with people within what we called our experience was crucial to be able to understand our products and our lifestyle. But I definitely think it has had some positives in the sense that people are able to really get all their questions answered, let's say from the menu. They've also, our check average has increased because they're able to see all the offerings and add on, rather than necessarily being pressured in a line when you have a customer right behind you that's kind of waiting to also order. So it allows them that flexibility when they're at their table and order at their leisure. Also reordering. So rather than, again, in our scenario where we, would have people kind of get back and online and order again, now they can do that comfortably within their seats. So if you're for example, working on your laptop and you don't want to necessarily leave it, that from a safety standpoint, you don't have to pick up everything, go back in line, order again. So it allows for a more seamless transition that ultimately, I think, improves the experience. So I think, we have basically then ultimately embraced the conversation component more when dropping off food if people want it. You can tell, by reading guests, do people want to know a little bit more? Do they want that conversation, or they're just kind of focused on what they're doing? And so ultimately, really, throughout training with our team and retraining, kind of this post-pandemic world, it's just reading our guests as to what they want right now. It's because the level of comfort is so different between different people. You have right now, kind of diverting this from tech a little bit, but from a mask standpoint, people that are completely appalled if you're still requiring masks, and then people that are completely appalled if, people are not wearing one. So it's navigating that. So it's just, that's requiring a lot of retraining and overall how we run our businesses and kind of shifting it almost on a weekly or daily basis.
Elizabeth, what do you think about this and the tech piece? How can owners and operators be using tech to their advantage, and what's worthwhile return on their investment of time and effort, and what's not? So what are you saying to your clients as you work with them about really helping them build a stronger business?
Yeah, I think what was so palpable last March of 2020 is that we went from a service industry to a product industry overnight, where we stripped away service and had to kind of come down to our most component parts, which is food. And I think in that kind of transition, which was stark and quick, technology really played an enormous role in that. And I think some people who were a little bit more analog or didn't use technology as the customer experience were on their back heel. And I think that it's not necessarily that. And I think, well, first off, kind of taking a step back of saying what's happened the last 5 years when we have cloud-based POS systems. We're not hardwired anymore. We have inventory structures, API connection that kicks out to your inventory structure. There's all kinds of things that are happening that I think has really made the culinary industry more efficient, because I think when it came to labor and cost, but pre-pandemic, it was very much that we have so much labor. How do we reduce that to get profit margins higher, et cetera, et cetera? And I think the pandemic compressed and put us in the pressure cooker that pretty much catalyzed this expansion of technology that would have taken years into 6 months. I think people were much more collaborative. I think people were listening to the end user. And I think as a result, we really kind of were in this pressure cooker. And I'm always in the mindset being using technology and data to like make informed decisions about your company, I think is something that people are less scared of anymore. And I shouldn't say scared, that's not the right word, but are less apprehensive about, because I don't think people are learning that technology doesn't necessarily replace labor. It just can replace people's inefficiency in the room, so they can actually do hospitality and they can create more food, and we can translate recipes that aren't handwritten into Spanish and doing all these other ways, and like converting it from metrics. And like there's ways that we can actually be more effective as operators as a result of technology, not that it diminishes space for team. And so I think that we're finally there, and I think it's just catapulting north. So I'm very intrigued to see where tech comes, and I think with that will come acquisition. There'll be absorption of technology stacks, buying out others, and there'll be a consolidation happening. And I do hope that as we do consolidate on the tech front, that we are still listening to operators, because otherwise we won't be doing anyone any service. But I'm hoping that tech companies will continue to do that.
So on the topic of tech, and we were talking a little bit about, having to revisit that traditional business model of volume. What do you think about cloud kitchens? And, for both of you, Daniela, as you continue to expand your concepts, like is cloud kitchens, digital kitchens, ghost kitchens, like all of this big conversation piece that's happening right now, what does this look like? Is this going to be the big industry disruptor that all of these think pieces are saying? Or is this just a Band-Aid to get us through this? Or is it just going to be kind of a hybrid, a little bit of this and a little bit of that? What are the thoughts surrounding this?
Well, in my opinion, I think a little bit of this and a little bit of that. There was a shift or migration of people. Let's start there. With the pandemic, we saw cities kind of empty out, move more towards the suburbs. I think that's starting to come back a little. But again, I think the pandemic gave people the opportunity to kind of reevaluate. Also, people are not back to the office yet. There's a lot of people that are now have the ability to work from home, where previously they didn't have that ability, or going into models that are more 50-50, or a couple of days a week, you're going into the office, a couple of days a week, you're staying at home. And that has created a different demand. I think it has shifted from what before maybe perhaps was more like a catering space now into the cloud kitchen space, and being able to service now these suburbs of a lot of people that were used to the conveniences of living in more urban areas where they had food at their fingertips, right? So I think it's a little bit of both, but I think also as people become more comfortable, they are seeking that human interaction, meaning they're still seeking going out, seeing people. Like, what are we providing besides a product? As we did shift to that product base for a little bit, but I think that the hospitality component, which is, still what I would 100% like to believe is the industry that we're in, not in a product service industry. We are seeking that interaction with people, learning from others, kind of absorbing a culture. That's what I seek with Colada Shop. When people step in, you're absorbing the music, the people, the hospitality, the food, and all together it becomes something greater than its parts. So I don't think that's solved by a cloud kitchens. Yes, it's a commodity. It'll get people access to more food and diversity of foods and areas. It also has lower barriers to entry for people that are starting a business, lower rents, higher margins potentially, even though questionable, because they're, a lot of them, those cloud kitchens rely on third-party platforms, which, as we know, have outrageous fees. So it's a different model. So I would say a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and I like to see where it goes, but I definitely think that cloud kitchens do not replace hospitality.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And also, Daniela, in terms of us going from service to product industry, I'm happy we're swinging back to a service because I missed it for a couple months. But yeah, I just think, we look at, I think to your point, like convenience is here to stay. Like there's going to be need and demand for things like cloud kitchens. The one thing I'm interested in, and I even look at something when Chili's, this is just one mass example, coast to coast, is Chili's, It had multiple locations shut down, didn't do delivery, and they converted several of their brick and mortars into a concept called Just Wings. And it made a killing. Like, they optimized SEO, they were on every delivery app, and it became more profitable than probably, I can't say for fact, but it became very, very lucrative very quickly. And I think that people are learning a lot from, like, what does it mean to, like, have service or just be a product? And for me, in my opinion, cloud kitchens are much more on the product side. It's like distribution, and you can have a good customer experience in the pipeline of that experience of, like, ordering to delivery. But I think at that point, the variables that you're trying to control are very limited. And, I think that what I'm interested to see is with these cloud kitchens, there's going to be, well, I guess to kind of go back to being data driven, a lot of operators relied on third party, as we've heard so often, delivery apps to really kind of be the courier for all of their food, but they didn't have control over their customers or transparency or their data. And they collected all of it. They collected the data for a very, very long time. And I wouldn't be surprised if the cloud kitchen model where they now know what demand are in neighborhoods. They know what concepts might be of need, and you can pop those into cloud kitchens. So I don't know. I'm intrigued to see what does come of all that information that was gathered for so long and who participates in cloud kitchens. But I think it can be on two sides of the equation. One, it could be an exceptional way of having satellite locations on behalf of a brand, and it can be very powerful. And it's happening like Zool Kitchen in New York. I think it did a great job of gathering different concepts and putting them into spots around the Manhattan. And on the flip side, I think that could be used for distribution of identifying what people want in the neighborhood, like Just Wings, and then just putting it out to market, and maybe with like friction to maybe more independents that are nearby. That's my opinion on them.
Yeah. And even on the flip side, not necessarily like cloud kitchen based, but I even see like more fine dining restaurants as well saw an opportunity in actually like to go and delivery, which was kind of, a no previously, right? Like no Michelin star restaurant would ever consider a takeout or delivery prior, or very few of them, and I think it, the pandemic allowed that to be kind of normalized. It's okay to, take this amazing food to go as well, and also generate like an incredible source of revenue for those types of restaurants. And now going back into the new normal, is like, do we keep that as well going simultaneously, because it allows us to extend our dining room for like restaurants that have very limited space. It allows us to actually, increase our profits that ultimately maybe will allow us to create more balance within our staff so we can keep them, let's say, in 4-day work weeks and so forth. So there's two sides to everything. I see the positives for sure, as you mentioned, like creating, satellite locations, lower barriers to entry, lower rents, and access to food, which ultimately is what we want. But I'll keep craving the hospitality, all along for sure.
Yeah. And I think just like alternative revenue streams are what we've learned, in the last year, so important. Because with more of them, we can find different you can adjust your business model, just not to be relying on one brick and mortar. And I think that's something, Danielle, that y'all have done so well between your CPG and your distribution and Goldbelly. I think there's so much to be said for that.
So I think that's a really interesting point. So like looking at different revenue streams and things like that. So as we are hopefully at the end of the pandemic, do you think that this is the end, or we're going to go back to a financial normal? And if we are going to build towards that, what part of the business model should we revisit? So we have a question in the audience about beverage programs. What are those going to look like moving forward? And what's the margins on those going to look like moving forward? So what do you think is part of the smart way to build a business as either a new entrepreneur in the industry or one that is trying to rebuild after what has been a tough year for all?
I would say, previously or prior to the pandemic, I think everyone was really revenue focused and like driving revenue. And I would say a lot of the times we made decisions that didn't necessarily impact positively the bottom line. We were increasing revenue, ultimately creating more work. But, within within that with economies of scale, things that necessarily trickle down to the bottom line. So I think it's making sure that that revenue that you're bringing in ultimately makes sense, and kind of stopping and really looking at data, because data is very important, and understanding, yes, let's say with the third-party platforms, we're getting all this extra revenue, but when it really trickles down, how much does that mean to your bottom line? And is that effort worth it for your team? Because, kind of going back to the beginning of this conversation and understanding, like, is the effort worth like pushing the team to that next level, or like that extra day, or that extra hour and a half they have to stay every day? And how does that impact the culture, right? And because a lot of the times it doesn't necessarily translate, like more revenue doesn't necessarily translate into more profit. So it's just making sure that we're taking that into account, in my opinion, when making those decisions, and being more thorough about it. And just looking at it in a more overall, more holistic picture. That's one thing that I'm doing now. It's just, and I'm talking just from my own personal like decision making. I was like seeking that revenue and going through a lot of streams. And quite honestly, like catering was one of those things for us, where we were, prior to the pandemic, like growing it significantly. And at one point it just require that, an extra manager on the team to handle that, and so many extra things like a van and so much more paper products and so forth, to kind of like be able to sustain that ultimately, when kind of we were forced to shut this down because we didn't have the customer overnight, it's just like, well, was that really bringing to the table what we thought it was? And it wasn't. And so I'm not saying obviously you can't make that work, but I'm saying it depends on your team and your operation. And I think just it's important to implement things, but at times also stop and see what's the value that this is bringing, and how is this affecting the overall like culture.
I definitely second all of that. And I think it goes back to kind of what we talked about in the top of the hour. It's like, start with the business model, start with really what makes sense. And Daniela, to your point, if it doesn't trickle down, there's a lot of ways in which we're like, oh, we can just add this on but the labor costs, even also too, like all the variables within that whole pipeline that could lead to not providing the best hospitality. Maybe there's one email that came through and didn't catch it. And like, there's so much other things that may come out of core competency. And I definitely, I echo what you've said, and I think I'll leave it at that, but I think it's very well put.
So I think, what's really coming through here is about creating the right culture and all of the things that feed into culture, right? Having the right menu, having the right kind of leadership, hiring intelligently, and things like that. So as we look at this, there's been an increase, I think, in the number of new operations that are opening and things like that. And, there's obviously been a lot of conversation about the lack of diversity and opportunity, that has been historically available for women or people of color or members of the LGBTQA community. So how do we, as women who are entrepreneurs in the industry and have come up through the industry, how do we create a broader culture in the industry to create greater opportunities, right? So we talked about ghost kitchens and having a lower barrier of entry, but it can't just be ghost kitchens and digital kitchens that provide opportunities. So what do you think, based on your own experience and what you've seen and how you build your own business, are ways that we can be expanding the industry to be more inclusive and provide more opportunities at that starting level? Elizabeth, would you like to go first?
I think that we kind of established Oyster Sunday to be, I'll kind of start just from Oyster Sunday's perspective. I think that we started the company, to make it remote, because it was a matter of like building a team of people that were like, building a team that was not bound by a city or not bound by the constraints of that. And we could be really coast to coast. And from that, we're able to really kind of expand our search and looking for team members that are, really qualified in different ways. And then so that's kind of one aspect of it, is a decision we made, and we're not in a brick and mortar, which we have, can do that for now. And the other side of it is that we've decided to make everything public and free, all of our resources. And because we never want to live that was because, again, I go back to like knowledge is power. And, we have to be able to provide and give information out and to address questions that are out. But, and we also don't want that to live in an echo chamber. So being very intentional about distributing that information, getting in the hands of communities that maybe don't know about Oyster Sunday, or we are not talking to directly, and trying to find great ways of being able to provide that knowledge or information that we hope is of value, not saying that it is, but it's just hoping it can be. And I think that's kind of where we come at it, is like, we want to talk to operators about how do we think about alternative revenue streams? How do we think about compensation models? What can alternative rent agreements look like? And giving that free out. We did a reopening critical path, which is a critical path from like everything about operations, HR, and we made it public and free, and out there and said, because every operator nationwide could, hopefully this helps to provide some like small checkbox that can help open, and everyone should have access. So I think that's one part of it, and that's how we kind of manifest as a company. But Lily, in terms of in terms of how do we help, really kind of incentivize or help support other women or any like coming back into the market. I mean, it's so difficult. I think I'm in the mindset that we seek out working with restaurants that like coast to coast, and trying to make sure that we're supporting a variety of restaurants. But in terms of where access comes in, access to rent and having enough access to rent negotiations, I just acknowledge it comes back to that and trying to give it as much as we can. But I wish I had like a better, like direct answer for it, but it's such a hard, but I think it just comes back to that, and having organizations that can support. But Danielle, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think from my angle is like making sure that through, as you were mentioning, like through our hiring, that we are giving people opportunity, but also developing them. Because again, those people might not come with the experience because they haven't been given the opportunity before. So it's like really being intentional as like who we're building up in our team as like, and giving them more knowledge every day, so they have those skill sets to grow with us or with other people. But it's just, I think it's building people's knowledge, and as they say, knowledge is power, to be able to ultimately get people to be in positions of leadership, because I think that's ultimately how the conversation changes. I think generally speaking, they call hospitality kind of like this industry of misfits, or like where a lot of people, come in from, different backgrounds, but they are not necessarily in leadership. That's one thing that I think is the difference. Is like, yes, our workforce is defined by that, but I don't think the people in actual leadership most of the time have that same background. So I try to make it a point of making sure that, giving training to people that might have not necessarily gone to school, that, or graduated high school or college, and just, starting, let me teach you Excel this week, and just start giving them like little tools every day, every week. So hopefully, because they're so great at their jobs, but if they don't have those skill sets that they need to kind of go to the next level, they're never going to really get to a position of leadership that ultimately then will have a stronger impact on the culture and an impact on the hiring that, continues. It basically has to trickle down. So I would say that's a crucial component, as well as ultimately, supporting organizations that also are providing trainings and, uplifting women and members of the LGBTQ plus community. So those to me are very important factors.
Absolutely. And I think even like tangibly, we've removed education levels from any of our job descriptions. That's not meant to be a requirement, because I think it's just, we have to start there. And if you read an application and it doesn't like even reflect who you are, you would never reply. So I think it's trying to create, I think it's a great point, Daniela. It's like creating, just being like, you don't have to have a high school education or a college education or these requirements, and being like, just come on and put your name in there, because you might be the most qualified person in the pool, and we just want to hear from you. And even like on our resources that we have built, we're doing like a open source like job board, where any sort of just kind of cataloging job boards nationwide, and that's open source, anyone can contribute to, because it's not only just about, we also don't want to live in an echo chamber of only talking to your own communities, because you need to get broader. when it comes to definitely finding the right employees. But I think it's important to just cast the net far, because if people don't know about the opportunity, they're not going to find you.
I'd love to know, actually, so, I think that this is not necessarily the culture that we were brought up in the industry, right? This idea of providing education, inclusivity, and all these things. So I'd love to know what in your backgrounds gave you the inspiration or the understanding to know, no, this is the kind of business I want to run. This is the kind of person that I want to be. Do you think it's because of how you came up in the industry? Is it because we're women? What do you think it is that created this understanding of a good culture creates a good business and people will come and flock to that?
I guess I'll start. Growing up, oh my God, basically, ultimately growing up in the industry in New York City gave me a different view, which was ultimately very skewed from what I grew up in, right? I always kind of had that culture shock initially, as far as women supporting women wasn't really a thing when I was kind of coming up in this industry, because there was only typically one seat at the table for a woman. So it became a very catty scenario of if there's only room for one of us, then we're in competition. And that's not how I grew up. And that was always very, weird to me. And just why can't we be at the table together? And why does it have to be one woman on the table? I didn't necessarily view things that way, but it was definitely very present. Also, working in kitchens, there was definitely a lot of constant abuse, I would say. In a lot of kitchens in New York, I was the only woman working at the time, or it was there's the pastry chef, and then in the hotline, it was only me. And there was, it kind of, you stuck out in this sea of men. And I just didn't understand that, because when I went kind of back and I would look at my culinary school peers, it was very much, actually, we had more women in our class than we had men. And how was it possible? Then when you actually translated that into a work environment, it was just a sea of men, and I was the only woman. And it wasn't in only one kitchen, it was in many. And I think that broy culture kind of just needed to end, honestly. And I came with something to prove, in the sense that I was an immigrant. I wanted to succeed. I had a dream, and I wasn't going to let things stand in my way. But it was definitely not a positive environment. I think at times it fueled me to change and just keep going. But it's definitely one thing that I kind of kept repeating in my head, weirdly enough, is I wouldn't want my daughter, and I don't have kids, but in the future to be in this, I wouldn't want them exposed to this. And ultimately that changed in my head as to no, I just need to ultimately do my part to change this culture. So if they want to be on it, they're comfortably in it. So I think it has changed a lot through the years. It's definitely, the culture within hospitality still has a lot of work to do, but I don't want to only shine on the negative sides of it. I think it's a very encouraging industry that gives opportunity to a lot of people that might not have previously have any skills, or have had rough patches in life. So, and it's exciting in the way that you're not every day sitting at a desk, and not everyone's meant for that 9 to 5 and the computer. People have other skill sets, and I think it embraces that. And ultimately, every day I remind myself why I got into this industry, despite its challenges. And it's really about bringing people together. It's food is that one thing that has that ability to bring communities together. And yes, we might not be curing cancer, but we are definitely doing our part in making people happy. So, it's kind of two sides to that story.
And I think on my end, I grew up, my mother was a really meaningful part of my life, and she's a doctor and kind of just a rock star in her profession. And so I always looked at the idea that you were never bound by your gender or any of those limitations. And on another personal level, I'm severely dyslexic, so I have a really hard time and kind of overcoming that for me was like this idea that like nothing, like if you want to get it done, you'll get it done. You'll find an alternative path forward. And so I think I learned both of those pretty young in my life, and then from there kind of trajected out to what it is now. But I think again also was in restaurants and back of house, and I learned a lot from leaders that what you do and do not want to be. And at the end of the day, when it came out to building my own company, I wanted to find a different path forward that provided people with a space that resembled a life they wanted to live. And I think that mattered a lot and was built from the business model before I even met the people we were hiring. And I just think that when it comes down to it, like there can be another path forward, and it starts with if you have the ability and the opportunity to build a company, it starts from the ground up. And I think it starts just really the culture, what you want out of it starts early.
I love that, the overarching theme here is the culture and that intentionality of things, and that, so much of what you've chosen to do in both of your operations and your companies is about creating great opportunities and growing the industry. It's so clear from both of you that you have such a passionate love of this industry and just want it to do better. And I love that you're coming from it from two different angles, but ultimately have the same philosophy of let's uplift people and educate. And I think that's really important. We have a ton of questions from the audience, a lot of which luckily we've addressed during the conversation. But I think one that was really interesting, and I think would be a very practical piece of knowledge is, there was a question about examples about how shifting a staff role to an hourly or salary and the implications of that shift. I think because that's part of that culture that we were talking about, right? Creating menus and running an operation with the right revenue streams and channels that give opportunities to employees, but don't overwork them or undervalue them, and shifting them. So what are your experiences with the people that you've worked with in terms of going from hourly to salary, and what are the challenges surrounding that? Elizabeth, would you like to go first?
Yeah, I think because Oyster Sunday, we started right before the pandemic in October 2019. And so we were very small until the pandemic happened. And then we started growing with a lot of, and I would say I'm going to kind of use from my end independent contractors in lieu of hourly employees, because I think they're for our type of service are the same. And we made a choice very early on that we were having growth spurts, but we gave very timelines of saying like, we understand you're a 1099 contract now, but you will be full-time in X amount of months. You will be full-time X amount of weeks. And with full-time comes the following, and being very transparent about from the get-go of like what that looks like. We have tiers of like certain levels of employment have certain very transparent salaries that what you're coming in. It's pre-told your first interview. And, and I think that we just made choice that we cover 100% of healthcare. We require at least 10 days PTO paid. And what we made a commitment to was by a certain amount of months, always like trying to transition as many people as we can or wanted to come in as full-time. And we have done that as of this month successfully. So I'm very excited to have that. But I think that's kind of my closest reaction, direct experience with that. And then we also are helping with our clients to advise how to like build a business model, how to think through it. What does that look like? So kind of a little bit more one step removed on that front, but Danielle, I would love to hear from yours as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think I've done this at times successfully and honestly at times unsuccessfully, right? I think promoting people into a more managerial salaried position before they were potentially ready can be very detrimental to that person that might have been incredible at the job that they were currently doing. And, that has taught me that, setting very clear expectations of the role. And at times, when people are transitioning from hourly to salary, they tend to start like multiplying, right? It's like, well, how many hours is this? And like, or vice versa. Some, people in management, it's like, well, if I divide my salary into the hours, like how much am I making? And it's just, I think the focus I've tried to like shift the focus into like, what are you learning and what skills are we providing besides, and obviously benefits as health insurance and so forth. But ultimately focusing on like, how are you growing? versus just doing a task. And I think that's really where we've created a more successful transition, and while having that path that's very clear to the employees of like, what are you learning like week after week or month, and having goals so they can see their own personal growth. And that ultimately provides more value than necessarily just a dollar amount that I think, Lily, as you mentioned earlier, can be very short-lived. You know, like that promotion or hourly raise or just even salary raise can be, you know, you forget about it. It's like, ultimately, what does your day-to-day look like? Are you happy doing it? Do you feel that you're progressing and you're growing as a person, as a human, not only in this company, but also giving you skills that as you're trying to see your goals further out, that you can accomplish them. Like, so I think that is crucial in the shift between hourly to salary, because even when you're talking like especially tipped wages, sometimes, you know, when you're translating that into salary might not be the easiest thing. People are like, well, I'll just, if I bartend, I'll make so much more money potentially. And it's just like, okay, you're doing a task that's, you know, in a way repetitive. Are you actually growing within that industry, and is it taking you where you want to go? So I think that that summarizes it. I don't want to be repetitive, but just like where do you want to be, and are you taking action towards that?
And I think part of it too is the stability of, you know, like sometimes people have chosen to stick away from tip wage because you don't know when you're going to get cut. You don't know if it rains outside, and, you know, like, and then all of a sudden the dining room gets by half, and I just think that there's the stability and the kind of the consistency factor, where maybe it does include healthcare and whatnot, it outweighs potentially that additional $5,000 at the end of the year, or 10, or so on and so forth.
Agree. But I've also learned that that's not what, like, you know, at times, like, that's what I've always wanted, but that's not what everyone wants. And some people are just are happy doing the task and are happy, you know, just kind of with the ups and downs and having that flexibility because that fits their lifestyle or their current goals better. You know, they don't want the additional responsibility or so forth. So I think it's taken me a while to also understand that not everyone has the same goal. So I think establishing that from the beginning of just like, and that's why I mentioned, like, I've done that unsuccessfully as well. It's just like, just making sure that, you know, that transition aligns with that person's goals, and like, you know, and that ultimately then will be a fit, rather than like trying to force it upon someone that might not want that at the time.
I think, I mean, we only have like a couple of minutes left, so I'd like to wrap it up, but I have one more question I'd like to ask both of you. You know, it's clear that you are building cultures, and my last question was going to be, what are your tips for building success? But it's clear over the conversation, it's about transparency. It's about creating the culture that you want. It's about, you know, creating educational opportunities for career growth, about good communication, about an appreciation for different skills and what people bring to the table, and seeing them as individuals. But what I loved in this last few moments was also about the humility of knowing, like, yeah, I don't have all the answers. I don't know, but I'm willing to find out and work with my employees in this way. So I guess my final question is, you know, both of you are making dents in the culture that has existed, in creating a better culture for the industry and moving forward. And it's clear that it's been successful. I wonder, what are your hopes for the culture moving forward? What are your dreams for the food and beverage industry as it rebuilds? And what are areas that you would like to see? What are opportunities where the industry can continue to build that you might not have gotten to just yet?
I think on the immediate term, I do think that I really hope we find something beyond, if you're looking at employment as opportunity for growth and career development, compensation. And I think there's this huge void of benefits, healthcare, something that mental health, physical health, things that come at no surprise for any of us in this call. But I think that I really do hope that last part really changes. And I know something that we are actively working on at Oyster Sunday. And, you know, and it's something that I'm really excited to like keep drilling at, because I think until we do that, the first two are going to be, again, when we go back to what the pandemic really put out on the table, it's that we had to choose between well-being and compensation. And beyond career development, that part of the job opportunity in any capacity we can as independents. We need to figure out how to a way to make it exist and to make it across the board.
I don't think I can agree with you more, Elizabeth. It's just kind of making sure that we're not taking, as we're giving other people with hospitality and services, our food, so much that we're also not taking away and draining our team simultaneously. I think, it's creating an environment where it's a give as much as we can of growth, of stability, of like, where they don't, we're not overworking crazy hours, are people that ultimately then end for, drugs and abuse and alcoholism. Like, it's creating, I think it comes back to more just stability, and, offering resources, as you mentioned, and just creating an environment that's more stable for everyone. And it's not always about more covers, more revenue, more. It's just also, looking at the impact of how can we make it work for them and for us as business owners simultaneously, and be happy at the end of it, Yeah,
I mean, our teams are the heartbeat of what we do, and we can be four walls and inventory and food product, but at the end of the day, the entire experience is made by those people and by everyone, team members in the room, and like we have to take care of them. And again, that's why I think when you think of business health, it comes to retention. I think it's important, but that's like an immediate. And then the long term, I hope that we get have a lot more independent operators have access to spaces, and because I think in same with 2008, there was this like unbelievable creative boom, and we're seeing those going into like pop-ups and more of that sort. And I really hope that we can find like meaningful ways to have different voices in the room. And I really think it has to start. It's going to start now, and we have to like amplify a lot of different operators coast to coast, because some just even it may be publications or access to rent and to funding and to all that we have to, that's another whole part of it, that like if we don't have this new kind of new operators coming to the scene for multiple different factors, we're going to lose a lot of talent.
I think the best way forward for this industry to be sustainable and financially successful is, building on what both of you have said, is having a lot of great opportunities for a lot of great people. And I think that is really what is at the core of what needs to happen. Lots of independent restaurants provide an opportunity for a lot of different people to find their path in this crazy industry that we love and want to so much to do well. Well, we're a little over time, but this was such a great conversation. I'd like to thank both of our speakers today for taking the time to share their passion and ideas with us and their experience. I also want to thank the School of Hotel Administration, the Center of Hospitality Research, eCornell, and Nicole for their support in making today's webinar happen, providing a space for us to share these ideas with the industry in hopes of creating opportunities for the F&B industry to rebuild better and stronger. And I personally would really like to thank the both of you. It was so inspirational to hear you both speak that even me as a weathered professor, I feel really, I've re-fallen in love with the opportunities that this industry has moving forward. And I'm just so inspired by the strong, badass ladies in front of me. And I cannot wait to see what you are doing next. So thank you. And thank you to all who joined us today. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and thank you.